Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another forecast. So, yesterday I made one about this upcoming severe weather event that's going to be moving through the southeast in this whole region right here, specifically around southeastern Texas, Louisiana, and a little bit into Mississippi and Alabama. But I also really quickly want to look at this morning's severe weather threat because it's actually ongoing at the moment as I make this video. So, I have to make sure I get this out. So this here is Florida. Right now we have a band of storms that's been moving east, basically, and they could be bringing a tornado threat depending on what actually happens. There's not too high of instability, so these storms don't really get to get very high in the atmosphere to really take shape and become stronger. So it's most likely just going to be some spin up systems, like spin up tornadoes or something like that. This is our reflectivity, so it kind of shows us the radar products. And based on my phone's radar, which has velocity data, some of these are rotating, which could lead to a few tornadoes that might spawn like right in the coastline, right as they make landfall. Basically, what happened with this is a convergence band occurred right in the ocean. So what a convergence band is when you have winds coming from one direction. So these winds are more northerly and these ones are more westerly. So what happens is along this little band, there's convergence, and as winds and air move together, they can't really go down into the water, so they only have to rise. And that leads to storms forming right here, something we saw this morning. I'm actually going to go back to the satellite product right here and go back a little bit in the future. I'll do 200 frames. So bring this back, it'll load real quick. You can kind of see in the morning, right? This is at 3 a.m. Central Time. There was this band of storms that formed right here, basically right about where I outlined, right in this little corridor out in the Gulf of Mexico. And these would strengthen, and now they are moving onto the shore. They haven't brought any tornado risks quite yet. This is severe thunderstorm warning from earlier. That was probably for wind damage. And here, nothing else has been issued. No tornado warnings or anything like that. There's a small possibility of tornadoes, so I'm going to move into the NAM NST just to get a sounding real quick. So it is currently about 15Z, 16Z. So I'm going to go and take a sounding right here off the coast as these make landfall. I'm going to take two soundings from a little bit southern and a little bit northern. And as these are loading, I'm also going to look at these SPC outlook. They have a little 5% risk right here and 2% for tornadoes. So again, it's a very select area. It's just outlining that there is a possibility of tornadoes in this region. In the north, most likely not, just because those storms have already passed and moved east. But those storms making a landfall on western Florida down here in the 5% risk, that does have a decent chance of actually really causing something to happen, at least somewhere on that coastline. So here we have two soundings. This is the both 16Z soundings, but you can see this is good lower level shear. So as the winds move up with height, they are turning and rotating. And this is a good supercell hodograph. And there is a decent amount of cape, not really too much, but it's a little bit, and it's probably enough to make this actually happen. Essentially, what this photograph is saying is that supercells are fairly likely, and we already see this happening. A few little beans. It's kind of hard to see with this radar because it's composite, so that means it's basically taking any precipitation at any level of the atmosphere. But there are these little shapes here with little bits of curves. It's a little hard to tell, but with a more defined radar, I can say that these are supercells. So there's this risk this morning. Again, it is something definitely to look out for. This is our more northern sounding I took, and it does also have those characteristics, but not nearly enough cape for it really to do much. It's still a possibility as these make landfall, so anyone in this area needs to be looking out for that. And that's part of why I've tried to issue this so early in the morning. It's just so if there is anyone out there watching from this region, they do know to look out for it, even though it's probably been in the news all morning. Now, I'm going to move into the risk that's going to be happening on the 8th and 9th. So I'm going to move forward in this product a little bit. So I don't have enough data quite yet from the NAM NST, but I can get a little understanding of what's going to happen in this region here. So I'm going to move my sector to Southern Great Plains, so Texas. This is Texas right here. It might be a little hard to see under all these black lines, but this region right here, so This is about the outlines of Texas right here, and we have Louisiana over here, and Mississippi, Alabama, this direction. Not the greatest drawing, but this way you can kind of see where I'm looking at. So there's this low pressure system that I've been talking about quite a bit, centered right here over Oklahoma in the panhandle of Texas up here. So this is a surface low, and it's a lot more northern and western now. So that's actually going to end up bringing some snow to the north or to the Midwest, which I am going to talk about. This forecast is mainly focused on the severe aspect of the storm. So as this low pressure system moves northeast, it's actually going to end up with a few little surface lows down here, and it does have an open warm sector. So what I'm going to look at here is the dew point temperature. So this is kind of an occlusion up here where the cold front slash dew dry line here is kind of catching up with the warm front. So we can really just imagine the open warm sector as being this little region in here, right? I'm going to draw a dry line right here. And what a dry line is where on one side we have higher dew points and more saturated air, and the other side we have lower dew points and less saturated air. What happens is as air hits this line, it'll rise because of the sloping, right? So you can imagine this is looking at the surface, right? So the dry air right here will wedge underneath the moist air and make it rise into clouds. And this is how we get our storms. That's where storms will initiate on this boundary. The other thing is that dry lines are normally very slow moving. This will be moving here very slowly, and storms that form right on this dry line can move a lot quicker and actually be more discrete. It's something we're kind of seeing off this product here. It is a somewhat fast moving dry line for normal, and it kind of changes into a cold front as well. Cold fronts usually move a lot quicker than dry lines and end up with more linear modes. So that's something that's going to be coming from this as it forms as a storm, right? So we're going to see, if I look at CAPE real quick, this basically shows me how much instability is in the atmosphere and how quickly these storms will rise. So we can see these purples here. They are shaded with a little bit of, grayer colors. That means that there's a cap, which means there's stable layer stopping anything from forming. As that cap erodes from surface heating, this will actually initiate some storms right in this sector here. And as you remember, we have the low pressure system up here, the dry line, and the warm front, which is draped around here, right? So I'm going to draw that out real quick. Dry line somewhere around here, and a warm front somewhere around here. That creates a pretty nice open warm sector that these storms can use. Although there's not really going to be enough CAPE in this region right here to actually use any of that. So if I take a sounding from this region right here in Southeast Texas, kind of see what the atmosphere is going to look like in that region. As we saw in our last sounding in Florida, as of basically right now, you can see how it kind of forms this little circle. You can see this kind of curvature right here. Right here, that's curvature. And this is most likely supercellular wind dynamics. So it curves up, and there's this weird backing thing happening right here. Basically, winds are kind of decreasing at this level of the atmosphere. It's a little bit strange, and they're changing a little bit. So that's something we might look out for this system. But this is definitely a supercellular product, and these have a lot of CAPE to work with. 2,500 joules per kilogram, and lots of CAPE in the lower levels right here. This is 3 CAPE, so essentially in this lower level of the atmosphere, not there, lower level right here, which is where tornadoes really thrive from in the lower levels, there's a lot of instability to be had. So any rotations happen in the lower levels will be stretched upward, and that will create stronger tornadoes, which this sounding also shows by this potential hazard of PDS tornado, which is not a good thing. And we have pretty good CAPE as it goes up in the atmosphere with caps around 12 kilometers up. That's really high up in the atmosphere. 12 kilometers is somewhere around, I believe, 50,000 feet. Might be incorrect. Maybe 45,000 feet, something along those lines. Those are some really big storms as they go up, especially for the winter. Not to mention that as we look higher up in the atmosphere, I'm going to use a yellow arrow for this, the winds are a lot faster, so any precipitation will be jetted out from the storm. So if we imagine a supercell like it looks like this, precipitation that arises is going to get jetted out this way. A bad arrow. Let me use a different. So as precipitation comes up from the storm, the stronger flow aloft essentially means that anything forming will get out of this tornado's path, which would form right in this hook over here, essentially leading to very visible tornadoes and dangerous tornadoes as well. We could be looking at something pretty dangerous for the south, and SPC has already highlighted this. As we saw in our last forecast, there was an area around here that saw this. The day 4 outlook as well is showing possibilities for the states near Florida, Georgia. Now, personally, if I were to put a tornado risk anywhere, I would say the greatest risk is most likely right in this region right here. This is where we're going to actually have a chance for discrete elements. And as this whole system moves more into Louisiana, there's going to be a lot more rain and storms, just creating a linear mode. That's not exactly a great viewing, but essentially these storms can become really clustered, and tornadoes don't do well when there's a lot of clustered precipitation in their way. They rely a lot on a warm inflow, which has basically it's air that is not rain cooled. So if there's a bunch of rain everywhere, tornadoes will not have a fun time. I'm looking at simulated reflectivity now, which is essentially just what a radar would show you if we looked at this. Now, unfortunately, we can't see very far into the future because this product is not out enough yet. So I would have to wait until believe 1 p.m. Central Time to actually see a new product. But you can kind of see here there are updrafts that kind of form all these little bubbles here. Those are updrafts, and some of those could form a supercell. Maybe a few discrete supercells here that could move and probably rampage this region over here. One thing to look out for the system though is a lot of convection happening over the Gulf of Mexico. So as we can see here, there's a lot of rain and storms that are forming here. And as they move this direction, they can actually start to hinder a lot of possible instability that could form in Louisiana, right? This is only 11 a.m. Central Time for this region, and that's not really enough time for instability to really pick in. All this cloud cover that's forming over here in Louisiana probably takes away a lot of the chances for anything to be actually severe. Although you can see here this band of storms that could lead to some risks for Louisiana here. I don't like what Florida is seeing right now. Essentially, there's this little band. And if I move forward a little bit, you can imagine these as possible supercells. I'm going to take a little sounding just to kind of see what the wind environment would look like as we go up into the atmosphere. Now, this might be a little bit convectively enhanced. You can see there's a huge moist layer, not really much cape. But this wind environment is absolutely insane. I mean, like the shear here, so much turning as it goes up with height. It's a little hard to tell. You can see all this. It's probably being messed with all this like storms going on. I'll take another sounding for just before they hit the coastline, I guess. It's a little again, it's very difficult to actually see what's going on with the issues of rain-cooled air that forms from storms. But that's the main hindrance that we're probably hoping to see with this is that hopefully the convection over the Gulf of Mexico will help limit the tornado threat to only Texas instead of Texas and Louisiana. And we can see here again, insane wind dynamics. This flow is absurd for only a few kilometers into the atmosphere, and there is some cake to be had, but that's definitely going to be one of the biggest issues that this system has, is effective available potential energy, which is what CAPE stands for. Again, how much instability is in the atmosphere. I'm going to look at the NAM model, which is less detailed, just kind of see what's going to happen on Tuesday. But essentially, it looks to be mostly wind damage. This is basically just a huge line of storms that could bring wind damage. It doesn't look as much of a tornado threat. Personally, if I were to place a threat on this, I would probably let me move these out of the way just to kind of see what we're looking at. Most likely, I would put tornado threat mostly focused on this region right here, with a possible other tornado threat happening later on in the evening, around 6 p.m., 7 p.m. in this region. Regarding the wind threat, I think we might see slight wind threat here, but more of a higher wind threat in this region right here, just as this whole system will slowly become a huge line segment as it moves on, right? So we'll probably have a few discrete storms here as they move this direction, and then more of a linear mode here. And as they move into Louisiana, this is probably going to become even messier with only a chances of discrete storms here in Louisiana. And then as they move on here, it's just going to be huge line of storms that moves east. This is kind of our division of storms. So I would say this is about 6 p.m. or not 6 p.m. excuse me, 4 p.m. This region right here would be about 7 p.m., from that little time period, 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., and here would be about 10 p.m. And as it moves into the night and all that. So that's my general idea on what's going to happen. I could just use the name NST to kind of show me, the same kind of difference, right? Like it's simulated, right, reflectivity. That is kind of what it's showing, which is slight wind up here, but more discrete elements down there. Possible discrete elements here. Then as it moves to 7 p.m., we don't really get to see future. That is probably how I'd place this whole system going, is something like that on Monday. Tuesday, probably just wind damage. That's about all we can really get from that. I did say I was going to touch on snow a little bit, so I will do that. Mostly I'm focusing on the severe aspects, just because that's what I do better, and I understand that a lot more. But it is useful to, understand snow to an extent. So as this low pressure system moves to the United States, it's actually looking to be a lot more less closed, and it's looking to be a lot more north. Originally, we believed the system would be centered around here and move more eastern, but now this is actually looking to move more northeastern. So a lot more rain is likely for the Midwest and more snow for the Northeast, or not the Northeast, the Great Plains up here. You can kind of see this if we look at this product, right? So we have the low pressure system that's formed right around here, and instead it's moving a lot more northeast along this track instead of eastern, which might actually help to damper a lot more of the severe threat. If this surface low that would have formed underneath this had formed more down here, we could have seen a lot more dangerous severe weather on top of what we're already seeing along these states. Instead, we're probably going to see a lot of snowfall on this side of the low pressure system and more rain here as well, because it's going to pick up a lot of moisture from the Gulf of Mexico. I look at the dew point temperature. You can see these lighter colors here. That's a lot of dew point. And when the temperature is only about 35 degrees, that means relative humidity is huge, right? Relative humidity essentially shows me how much humidity is at every level, especially only at the surface, like so. And the surface dew points here, in respect to the actual temperature, are very saturated air, which would lead to lots of snow falling. And this relative humidity actually goes up pretty high into the atmosphere as well. These white colors mean higher relative humidities, even a few kilometers into the atmosphere. And even so, we keep going higher and higher, and these colors are still here, and they start to damper out a little bit at 500 millibars. But essentially, we're going to see a lot of snow here, which I can see through total snow accumulation here, which is a product I quite like to use. About 12 inches of snow probably in Nebraska, Iowa, this whole region. 10, not 12, but same idea remains, right? So little bands of snow could occur on the Illinois front and this line here. This is more uncertain. We are looking at quite possibly a good amount of blizzard conditions for this whole region. And how heavy the snow will be falling is a little bit uncertain, but we are seeing some very heavy snows through this product right here in around the Des Moines area, western Illinois, and regions around Kansas City and Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas border right there. And as this moves into the way up here, it probably loses a lot of its dew points and moisture, so that kind of dampens the snow threat as it goes into Canada. Although we do see some lake effect snows as it reaches Ontario and Quebec. All that said, I think the main threat with all this is definitely severe weather that will occur right down in this region, especially the tornado threat near, I believe that's Houston, right over here. Not 100% sure on that, but in the Houston region, I believe, that's where the tornado threat, I believe, will be greatest. My idea is that there will be this severe, or this discrete element possibility right here. Few discrete storms. This is our more discrete region. And probably some more banded linear storms that aren't really going to do too much, mostly just rain. And as this moves into our next little sector, there's a chance of a few discrete storms right here in Louisiana, but not too many. And a more linear storm again. And then as we move into the night, most likely just this huge band of storms. And this will be severe. This is probably more severe. This won't be. But as this moves on, it'll just be this huge line that moves all the way across Florida. Like so. I think that Tuesday's threat is mostly wind damage. And Monday's threat is mostly going to be tornadoes in this region, but wind damage as it moves east. Just because of how strong the flow is, it could lead to possible derecho conditions depending on what really happens. In conclusion, thank you for watching this forecast. I'm going to be doing a little recap on the forecast, I think after the event, and probably another one a little closer to it. So most likely on the same day of this forecast, I'm going to issue what I think is going to happen. And we're also going to see how accurate what I just did was. Remember, a lot of things can change based on how far away we are from an event. So we need to be careful not to go to drastic conclusions at this point. But there is definitely a severe tornado threat for most definitely this region right here. That's my main point from this forecast, but otherwise, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.